Hello ladies and gentlemen, Willie here. Arena on 2.43. Are we just going to be seeing the same couple of comps all day, every day? Your rogue mage, your disc priest rogue, warrior druid, rogue mage priest, warrior druid lock? Or are we going to be seeing some surprises, maybe in the earlier seasons, as for what people will figure out are viable? Obviously with our server sizes these days we will have far more players looking to get into the new arena content, but at the same time we're going to have a significantly harder competition bringing years of skill and knowledge to the table. And for once with PvP there is no set in stone benchmark like we have with PvE content, where despite it being very easy or easy enough baseline, people really min-max it and speedrun to get the most out of it, because they need to find some way to keep the content a bit more fresh and enjoyable, since it's very much known already before you even step through the instant store what you're going to be doing. For PvP content, metas are far more rigid. When those gates open and you see the enemy comp, you already know whether it's going to be decided within the first 2 minutes or whether you're going to need to get the poop sock ready, and it takes for somebody to break metas like that and stand out to really be a unique person. So just to give it a mention, teams start at 1500 rating and TBC. Arena points are earned after having played a minimum of 10 games per week. You get the least point for 2s, more for 3s, and the most for 5s. So despite what you may think about 5s, they will be extremely popular, at least at the start of each arena season, or more on the Monday, Tuesday, Wednesday, whenever people decide to bash out their 10 games, if they just want the points from the activity. And take that extremely popular with a grain of salt. Scenarios in Mr. Pandaria were extremely popular because you could Valor cap in no time at all. It turns out if you give the best rewards, people will just do whatever you offer. Anyways, it does cost 40 gold per person to make an arena team, so 80 for 2s, 120 for 3s and so on, and people often remake each week if they're just doing it for the points, though Blizzard say they will be using some kind of MMR for matchmaking, a modern MMR at that, and that back then, apparently at least, there was some kind of hidden MMR system, but your arena point gains are based upon your rating, not your MMR, right? So with all that in mind, will PvP just be sold as PvE has? TBC Arena is quite rock, paper, scissors, rogue druid, to be honest. Well, speaking about that, I came across this the other day which I found very interesting, which is an arena gladiator representation from way back in the day during actual TBC. A gladiator being a person who is in the top 0.5% of players within the battle group. And back then North America, for example, had 13 battle groups. At the moment it should be 3, being Oceanic, Western, East, and then we only have 1 for Europe. That's how it is at the moment. And Blizzard have alluded they're likely going to be using some similar kind of formula to decide who gets the various mounts, titles, and whatever it may be at the end of the season. And as I've said earlier, we have smaller battle groups, but they're going to be so much more competitive than they were back during TBC. I think it's going to be a lot more difficult to see the top end rewards than it was back then, more so from a skill point of view than just a time invested one as we have at the moment with Classic. So let's take a look at the data here. Now this is snapshotted from Arena Junkies, and they have not taken this data directly from the Armory but from their own sources, so it won't be entirely representative. Also, it doesn't account for people playing alts or different accounts as well. But hopefully this should give you a good idea of how things actually went back in the day, and I just think it's fun to look at as well. So then, Season 1, the Wild West, a 20-week duration, 1011 gladiators, priest, warrior and warlock at the top 3, paladin 4th, that is surprising to me, and druid 2nd from the bottom. So some insight into this is back then resilience was at their lowest values, obviously, we're still in early game gearing, and it did not reduce damage from damage over time effects or mana drains, making early game SL locks and Shadow Priests oppressively strong. I'd bet more of these would have been Shadow than Disc, but Disc was also very strong even from the early game. The Druid is low whilst the Warrior is high. Could this be class representation from vanilla at all? And speaking of the Paladin being 4th, it was the new race class combo for the Horde who got of course their pretty Blood Elves, and maybe that influenced a lot of decisions early on. Poor Hunter though sitting at the bottom with the lowest representation. At this point in time they still had the dead zone. Season 2, we're still in fairly early days really, a 23-week duration, 2,979 gladiators. I bet that'd be a lot more people having reached level cap and actually getting into the endgame content by that point in time. Reasonably similar to Season 1 actually. Priest, Lock, Warrior, reigns supreme once again. Rogue is creeping up there in ranks, and poor Hunters are less than 4% of nearly 3,000 players. Guess why? Yep, Dead Zone still exists. I can't imagine how anybody hit Gladiator with Dead Zone being a thing. It doesn't sound like any kind of fun to play. And Mage is still very much middle of the pack, which I found surprising. Season 3, now we're getting more into the endgame gearing of TBC, and it had a huge 29-week duration. This will likely also be our longest season as per our current patch knowledge, with Season 3 being released alongside Phase 3, then in Phase 4 it'll just be Zul'Aman and no new Arena season, and Season 4 won't come till Phase 5. 5,473 gladiators, this is the highest representation, according to this data, throughout the whole duration of TBC, showing this is the real peak of the interest for Arena. Priest and Warlock fall off heavily as Rogue and Druid begin to surge up in the ranks. Pala is way down comparatively as well, Hunter still at the bottom, despite the Dead Zone actually being gone by this point in time. Maybe there was just too much negative stigma around the class. I really don't think they performed this poorly. And finally, Season 4, end of the line, comparatively short with a 17-week duration, 5,095 gladiators, and it's actually a full-on copy-paste of Season 3 on who goes where here. So the Hunters never left last place according to this. Mages were consistently middle of the table, and the biggest shakeups in the ranking were Rogue and Druid moving from barely average to clearly in a tier in their own on terms of power level. And today I'm assuming that we will be releasing with 2.4 resilience. This means that on top of the less chance to be crit and damage taken from crits, mana drains will drain less and damage over time effects will deal less. Hunters will release without the burden of a Dead Zone. Mages will have Ice Block, Baseline. Rogues will scale cheat death with their resilience. At one point it was just a flat 90%, and I think it was in patch 2.4 it was changed to actually scale, so it will be a lot weaker early on. So overall, I'd expect our Gladiator representation to look very different from how it was back in the day, of course. We know so much more that obviously I think that is to be expected. On top of that, our class balance is already known, so it's going to come very much more down to how gearing affects our characters. Some classes are great at taking hits and really benefit from resilience, like Druids or Warlocks. Other classes can put out huge bursts and love it when their victims have very low defenses, like Mages or Shamans. I do think overall it's going to be pretty set in stone as to what will be frequently seen at higher ranks, as by mid-Season 1 or for certain by Season 2. And if I had to guess the class representation for TBC overall, I'd say it'd be something like Rogue, Druid, Priest, Mage, Lock, Warrior, Shaman, Hunter, Paladin. Maybe some mix-ups in the middle of the table between Mage, Lock and Warrior. I think they're pretty like for like in terms of power. I wouldn't even say Lock would be S tier with the overall resilience changes in early seasons. Moreover, there is a lot more to Gladiator than just queuing and being better than people. Counter comps, queuing at the right time, dodging when people are trying to counter you, managing tilt, and so on and so forth. I think it's going to be interesting to see whether history repeats itself, or it's all going to be RMP, Warrior, Druid from the get-go. At least comp-wise, I don't think we are in for too many surprises. There's a reason the meta became meta. No one's going to bust out the Assassination Rogue, Holy Priest and shock the world as they hit Gladiator with it. Things like Cross CC, Utility, Mortal Strike effects, mana drains, each comp that has become meta has done so for a reason where they just work well together, don't overlap their CC DRs, and have a clear built-in win condition. Well, maybe not so much for the very early game, or in 5v5 at all. I really feel that 5s hasn't been explored at all to the extent of 2s or 3s, but I think people just take it a bit less seriously in general. So will TBC Arena follow the script of what is expected to be good? Yeah, it probably will, yeah, actually. Still though, it's finally a form of PvP where there's actually some real substantive quality behind the competition, rather than I can play more than you or I bracket stack. So I think that is the overall biggest win that we're going to see with TBC Arena. Anyways, let me know what you think. Were you a Gladiator back in the day? What kind of comp did you manage to achieve it with? I bet with the nature of battle groups and some of them being less competitive, people would have hit Glad on some really wacky stuff, which probably wouldn't fly these days, but hey, we'll see how it goes. As always guys, thank you so much for watching and listening in, and I'll see you in the next one very soon.